So that's Sarah. Now let's talk Hagar. All right. What do we know about Hagar? Well, Hagar is chapter 16, but also chapter 21. Okay, so turn to chapter 16, and we'll start here, and I'll say something about chapter 21 as well. But this one, I think I'll handle it a little bit differently this time, since we have two places I want to focus on, 16, and then the kind of the second half of chapter 21. For the sake of, okay, how are we going to handle this one? Well, again, kind of interested as I'm reading along through the book of Genesis, Matriarchs. Why focus on a particular lady? Okay, we had Sarai, then Sarah, then Rebecca. We'll talk more Rebecca after lunch. But now, okay, but we also had Hagar. And Hagar gets a fair amount of playing time. Okay, as you go through, if she's going to get all of chapter 16 and 2/3 of chapter 21, that's a fair amount of playing time. Okay? So, I want to walk through our introduction to Hagar pretty slowly in chapter 16. That's where I'll start, okay? Because in just the first 2-3 verses, we're told, I think, oodles about where she fits into things, okay? So we just finished, we're talking about Sarah mainly before. For context, the end of 15, this is probably helpful to know, the end of 15 is when, actually, it's probably more helpful than we realize. Okay, so we're moving through Genesis. We have Sarah in Egypt, we just talked about, that's in 12. 13, Lot and Abram divvy up the land, they separate. 14 is Melchizedek. 15, Abram is getting a little testy. Oh Lord, what will you give me? My heir is Eliezer of Damascus. The Lord says, look to the stars, if you can even count them, so will your offspring be. And Abram believed, and it was credited to him as righteousness. First time the Bible uses this word to believe. Genesis 15, verse 6. He believed, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Okay, and that verse is quoted a lot in Paul's letters, Romans, Galatians, and so on. Genesis 15:6. He believed, it was credited to him as righteousness. That's chapter 15. He goes to sleep. There's also a dream there. He sees the Lord passing through broken animals as a smoking pot and a flame of fire. It sounds kind of like Exodus. It sounds kind of like passing through. It sounds kind of like a covenant. And 15 ends with, to your offspring I'll give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, Kenizzites, Cadmonites, the Hittites, Perizzites, Rephaim, Amorites, Canaanites, Girgashites, Jebusites, probably any other sites you'd like to put in there. That's how 15 goes. That will be a contrast. That's in the backdrop here. Abram getting testy, but then he believed. Okay? Now, chapter 16. Abram's not the only one getting a little testy. Okay? Sarai is also getting a little impatient. She's going to handle things a little differently. Right? Chapter 16. Sarai, the wife of Abram, had not given birth. So I'm just reading. Bear with me as the pace here. I'm not reading from the ESV here, so just bear with me if you hear something a little different. I'm just trying to bring out what's been written here. So, okay, Sarah, the wife of Abram, did not give birth to him, but to her was a maidservant from Egypt. Okay. So already we were just ended with a bunch of other nations. She does have a handmaiden, a maidservant from Egypt, whose name is Hagar. Now Hagar is a name formed from the word for sojourner. So even the name Hagar looks like, okay, I'm a sojourner. I'm a foreigner. Okay? Her name is Sojourner. Her name is Hagar. Okay? Sarah said to Abram, behold, the Lord has held back, the Lord has restrained me from bearing, from giving birth. He's held this back from me, which is our attitude as Christians. What is the Lord not giving me? He's held this back from me. Why don't I have that particular health, or that house, or that peace of mind? Why has the Lord held back from me birth, giving birth to children? Go now unto my maidservant, my handmaid, perhaps, oh boy, perhaps, not a guarantee, perhaps I will be built up from her. And Abram listened to the voice of Sarah. Sound familiar? Especially that last line. What does it sound like? Oh dear. Okay. Abram listened to the voice of his wife. Let me say it again. Abram listened to the voice of his wife. Oh dear. Okay. Remember that Garden of Eden stuff that was hovering over the wife-sister narratives? Okay. In fact, not only that is what? Sarah took, oh dear. Sarah, the wife of Abram, took Hagar, the maidservant, the Egyptian maidservant, after 10 years of dwelling. Abram was in the land of Canaan 12 years, and she gave her to Abram, her man, her husband, for a wife. Okay? Sound familiar? Listen to the voice of his wife. She takes, she gives. Okay? And pretty soon we'll have talk of the eyes. Now, what does this sound like? Sounds like Sarah was what? Sarah was a beautiful image of the church. A sacrificial church, bearing with it and trusting in the Lord. And Lisa Hahn brought up the fact that her eyes in this picture, we just talked about this. Sarah, look at that. We talked about this. Trust me, it'll be okay. I was struck by how much they put Sarah in white garments in these paintings. And you'll see that with Rebecca. You'll see that also what? With Hagar in some of this artwork. Sarah was a beautiful picture of that sacrificial church. Now here's what happens when that same church does what? Starts to act like Eve all over again. Starts to act like, let's say, the other church. The church of the serpent, the church of... he listened to the voice of his wife, seeing, taking, giving. Sarah, whoa, we're starting to run back into the Garden of Eden all over again. Okay? Which, of course, God's people fall into. One day you're sacrificing, and the next day it's what? Well, this just looks good to me. And so I'm going to see and take and give. And it's a rerun of the fall all over again. That's also why the language of built up, so I don't know what you have in English, but it's perhaps I will be, perhaps is not good because then it's not for sure. Perhaps I will be built up. Now who does the building? God builds Eve. God's people are built up by his word. The ark is built. Abram builds an altar. God's things are built. God is the builder. This is what happens when we think, I will be built up by this plan that I have devised. Okay, oh Sarah, we've come a long way. Built is the word for edify in English, right? Latin, edificare, and then in English we get edify. Edify means to be built up. This is Sarah's plan. Maybe, and this is what happens when you take your eyes off of the word, off of the promise, maybe I'll be built up in this way. I know the Lord's plan is here, but I'm getting a little testy. Abram believed and it was credited to him as righteousness, but I'm getting a little impatient. And maybe this plan will build me up. Okay, so she takes and she gives. And so Abram goes to Hagar. She conceives. When she saw that she conceived, she slighted her mistress in her eyes. Okay, now what's happened? Hagar's not exactly in a best place either. She's now using the eyes, as Sarah was doing with her reason and senses. I'm being withheld. The Lord is withholding. Maybe I'll be built up by this. What I see, what I take. So now she is what? Hagar's falling into this too. She slights, makes little of her mistress in her eyes. And Sarah says to Abram, violence! Have you heard of Hamas? Okay, Hamas is in the news for what Hamas does. Hamas is, that's what Sarah says. Hamas! Violence to me because of you. I gave my maidservant to your bosom, and she saw that she conceived, and she's making less of me in her eyes. May Yahweh judge between us, between her, between you, and between me. Okay? Abram said unto Sarai, behold, she's in your hand. Do to her whatever is good in your eyes. Oh my. Do you see what's happened? Sarah was that beautiful image of the sacrificial church. She's now thought it'd be better to try to be built up in her own ways, according to what she sees, in her own plan. And what happens? It affects Hagar. It also affects Abram. Hagar starts to follow suit, at least for a time. And we'll see what happens there. And Abram also starts to sound like, yeah, we're back in Eden again. Do whatever's right in your own eyes. And so what does Sarah do? She afflicts. This is the word for slavery. It's so ironic, isn't it? It's so ironic. This narrative. Why? Who's the Egyptian? She's the Egyptian. Who's the Israelite? Right here. What does the Israelite do to the Egyptian? Enslaves. Okay? Anybody see any irony there? Right? We know where this is headed down the road in Exodus. Right? So the Israelite enslaves the Egyptian. Afflicts her. Okay? Which is, the more this narrative unfolds, the more Sarah, the Israelite, turns into an Egyptian, and the more Hagar, the Egyptian, turns into an Israelite. A total reversal throughout this chapter. It's really fascinating. Kind of reminds me of John 9, the man born blind. Anybody? I don't know, we had some preachers in here, but at the beginning, man born blind, and then he goes what? Probably a prophet, Son of God, worthy of worship, light of the world, and so on. And then the Pharisees, we see everything that's going on here. And then we're not even sure, and yet totally blind. Total reversal as you go through that chapter. Same here. Yeah, go ahead.
Isn't that what happens with the church, though? As the
it is.
Goes more in after
it is.
The world,
it is. You're looking.
Will raise up a proper church.
The matriarchs, that's the theme for the day. Matriarchs in Genesis. The matriarchs, God's people, God's bride. The more they go after idols, the more they look like, right? The women of the nations, the more they look like the people out there, as it were. And that's exactly right. The Lord speaks of that way, especially in like Ezekiel. I betrothed you, and now you look like, right, a totally different bride. And that's what Sarah is falling into here. Every step of the way, she sounds more and more Egyptian. While Hagar sounds more and more like she's actually a pretty darn good she's afflicted, and then she flees. We're at the end of verse 6. And then she flees. Again, what will Israel do? Flee from Egypt because of the slavery, right? You can't make this up. It's just so brilliant. It's just fascinating. This is Israel. She's Israel. Hagar's turning into Israel. How? Because of persecution. Because of persecution. The angel of the Lord found her. Now that's worth a day and a half. Why? How much time do you have? The angel of the Lord found her. This is the first time the angel of the Lord appears in the Bible. Why is Hagar, matriarch I will call her, maybe we don't have to think of Hagar as a matriarch, why is she the first one to get the angel of the Lord? For such as these, I think, the angel of the Lord. First one. Why not Sarah? Why not Eve? Angel of the Lord. First one, Hagar. Why?
Does that have something to do with Abraham?
Afflicted. Abe's people, Abe was just told this in a dream. Your people will be afflicted. Oh my goodness, your people will be afflicted. Hagar's afflicted. Your people will have to flee. Oh my goodness, Hagar just fled. Your people will have the angel of the Lord lead them out of slavery to Egypt. Oh my goodness, Hagar just had the angel of the Lord come to her. Oh my goodness, Hagar is turning into my people. The last will be first. The Gentiles will be prioritized in brilliant ways. Okay? This is the first person to get the angel of the Lord, Hagar, an Egyptian who is, as you said, maybe more like a true Israelite at heart, as she is suffering and trusting in the Lord in all of this. Okay? So she flees, and she's turning more and more Israelite throughout this whole encounter. The angel of the Lord prioritizes her because this is what it's all about. My people will be in the wilderness of this world, and you are there. You're exactly my kind of person. This is Israel. You are it, Hagar, and therefore you're the first. Wait, I thought she was the last. Nope, not anymore. You're the first because this is the life of my people. You are embodying it. So the angel of the Lord found her. Where? Right next to the spring of water. Which is also exactly, this is what makes these narratives about the women so fun. Because the spring of water is what? This is exactly where you want to be if you're in the wilderness. This is where God wants his people when they're in the middle of the wilderness. Stay close to the water. Stay close to the water. Stay by the spring of water. Good things happen at the spring. Marriages happen at the spring.
Angel of the Lord, this is the pre-incarnate Christ here?
Yeah, that's okay. So anybody who's heard of this angel of the Lord, who is this angel of the Lord? Speaks like God, sounds like God, one with God, and yet distinct from God. Okay? Now you might think the angel of the Lord first appears to Abram with that sacrifice of Isaac, because the angel of the Lord's there too. Or the burning bush with Moses, because the angel of the Lord's there too. The angel speaks like God. Now I know that you haven't withheld your son from me. No, actually I haven't withheld him from God. God was the one that commanded this, right? No, from me. From me, the angel says, right? And the burning bush, right? The angel of the Lord was in the bush, and then God says from the bush. Wait a second. I thought that was the angel. Wait, no, God is in the bush? I thought the angel was in the bush. Yes. Yes. Right? And so this is why, and then when you fast forward to the New Testament, oh my goodness, the messenger of the Lord, that's our Lord himself in the flesh. Okay? That's why we conclude this is the pre-incarnate Christ. Appearing to Hagar first. Hagar! Okay? And she's by the spring of water, which is like promised land stuff. I'll give you springs of water.
Right.
You know?
In the wilderness.
In the wilderness. I'll give you. She's there. That's perfect. You're my people. That's it. Hagar's got it. Sarah, having a tough day, turning away from me, and yet I will bring it about that I will graft people in. And so Romans 9 comes to mind. My people, my Jewish people, they've turned on me, and yet I'm not going to let my word will still go forth and graft in a people for myself. The Gentiles will be grafted in after this Jewish rejection, and then yet, well, would that the Jews start to get jealous of the Gentiles, and they'll be grafted into that olive tree all the same. Regrafted, rebranded, okay? Same thing here. She hangs out exactly where she should be hanging out. Springs of water. This is like the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land with brooks of water, fountains of springs flowing out in the valleys. She gets it. She's right where she needs to be. This is also where people get married. It's like Hagar is, okay, again, bachelorette, where she's that, are you about to be married, Hagar, that she would go there? Well, she needs water. She's in the middle of the wilderness. Yeah, but it's a spring of water. Rebecca will get married there, betrothed there, right? Spring of water, exact same phrase that'll be used of Rebecca when Abram's servant is looking for the wife of Isaac. Okay? So she's right where she needs to be this is God's people. She's ready to be married. I thought she was forsaken and afflicted. She's in perfect condition to be married in the middle of the wilderness, which is exactly the Christian life when we think of our baptism throughout the pilgrimage of this life. She's right by the spring on the way to Shur. That's on the way to Egypt. And that is actually the first place that the people stop on the way out of Egypt. Which again is why this narrative is so brilliant. Here's a matriarch in the making by way of the persecution, by way of Sarah's turning, by way of Sarah's afflicting, even when God's own beautiful people turn on him, the Lord works through it to graft in a people for himself, as Paul would say. Okay? So Hagar, I said to Hagar, where are you going? Where are you going? Where'd you come from? Where'd you go? And she says, this is verse 8. Okay? I love this interaction here. Again, why the angel of the Lord for her first? This is why. This is what my people are all about. By the spring in the wilderness, Hagar, servant of Sarah, where have you come from? Where did you go? She said, I am fleeing from my mistress, Sarai. The angel of the Lord said to her, return to your mistress and submit to her. Now this is okay. Return, good word for repentance. She wasn't perfect, and we know that. Hagar was affected by Sarah. Hagar started to kind of adopt that living by the eye thing at first. Is this what I'm supposed to do? Look down on you? No, that's what Sarah was doing to you. Okay? So she turned. That's the language of turning, the language that the prophets will use for repenting. Return. Always a good word, a daily word, return. And submit, or literally be afflicted. Be afflicted by her hand. Take up your afflictions and follow me. Why would the way to life be one of affliction? Because it's taking up the cross and following the cross. So return and be afflicted. Return and take up your cross by means of her hand. And notice Hagar doesn't say anything. She's silent. Anytime you get this, and the angel of the Lord said, and the angel of the Lord said again, and the angel, it's like the teacher asking the question of the students in class, where you're just like, what'd you think of the homework yesterday, huh? What'd you think of last night's football game, huh? Nobody said anything in class. Anybody who's a teacher knows the feeling. She's not saying anything. She's listening to the word preached to her. Return to your mistress and submit to her. The angel of the Lord also said to her, I love that, also, said to her, I will surely multiply your offspring so that they cannot be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said to her, She's listening to the sermons. Here's one. Here's another one. Here's another one. Here's another one. Behold, you are pregnant. You'll bear a son. You'll call his name Ishmael, because the Lord has listened to your affliction. Okay? He shall be a wild donkey of a man, his hand against everyone, and everyone's hand against him. He shall dwell over against all his kinsmen.
And that listening to affliction again goes back to foreshadow.
It does.
Right?
It does. And we'll see this again in 21. But yes, listening to the cries in the midst of affliction, that's God's people. But Hagar beat him to the punch. So you'll have a nation. You'll name Ishmael because God has heard. Okay, so the word is first. Hearing before seeing. If you studied Revelation with me, hearing before seeing. Hagar, you're doing what God's people do. The word first. You just listen. Hagar just listens. Sarah got testy, but the Lord worked through it. When his people failed, the Lord worked through it to graft in. Here we go. Hearing before seeing. After the hearing. Yeah, Pastor Fisher, after the hearing, the Ishmael, God has heard. Then what happens? Then she calls on the name of the Lord, the one speaking to her. Notice the emphasis on hearing. Faith comes by hearing. The one speaking to her, you are a God of seeing. Okay, he sees me through his word. And now we talk about the seeing. This is also the only one in the whole Bible, the only woman to give a name to God like this. Okay? Naming God like that. Who does this? Not even his matriarchs we've seen so far. Okay? Sarah, Rebecca. Okay? The only known instance in all of ancient Near Eastern literature where the deity is addressing a woman by name, the only place where a human being is conferring a name on God like this. Only one who is honored with such a revelation and so on. So it's really, okay, this is a big moment. You are a God of seeing. Because here I've seen the one who looks after me. I guess I'll just say, the one who's looking after me. Therefore he called, wait a minute, who's he? Therefore it was called the name of the well, and we'll talk about this later after lunch, Ba'ir Lahai Roy, which means, what does your footnote have? Which means...
The well of the living one who sees.
Yeah, the well of the, living one who sees me, my seeing one who lives is probably all included in there. It is between Kadesh, holiness, and Bered, hail, plagues. That's God's people too. There's a road, there's a way. It's like, you know what it is? It's like Abram, when in chapter 12, he's between what? Bethel and Ai. Bethel sounds good. We have colleges named Bethel, House of God. Bethlehem, House of Bread. And Ai, which means destruction. Total. Now choose this way where you will go, life or death. And that's where Hagar is. Okay, and she's choosing life. All right. And then a fascinating little tidbit at the end here. Hagar bore Abram a son. Abram called the name of his son. Who did? Abram called the name of his son, whom Hagar bore, Ishmael. Abram was 86 years old when this happened. And fascinating, Sarah just fades from the narrative. Where's Sarah? She's gone. All eyes on Hagar. Okay? Abram names him. Now the liberals, the critics of the Bible would say, we got a mistake. Got a mistake. Because Hagar was the one who's supposed to name him Ishmael. And at the end, Abram's the one that actually gives him the name. What happens there? Who named the kid? Looks like Abram. No, I thought Hagar was supposed to. Oh, contradiction. Can't trust the Bible. No. That's not how Genesis works. That's not how the word spreads. What happens? It presupposes what? Hagar spreads the word to Abram. Right. This is what happened. Do you believe it? And Abram says, he shall be called Ishmael. And Abe is back by means of the word. If that makes sense. Okay? Whoa. Now that's Hagar in chapter 16. A model of faithfulness by means of persecution. Even if it comes at the hand of the True church. Sarah, what happened? And yet the Lord worked through it to graft in. This is my bride. She will be preserved. The painting will always have someone dressed in white. Not even the gates of hell will prevail against my lovely bride, even when she doesn't act like it. Okay? Now that's chapter 16. Keep all that in mind, because now we got to go to chapter 21. Okay? Now this is more playing time, as I mentioned. 21, and we'll take a look at verses 8 to 21. Now, as you hear this, I want you to be thinking about the similarities and differences between chapter 16, what we just went through, kind of our initial go with Hagar. Okay? Here's 21. So we finally get the birth of Isaac. Isaac has been born. That's at the beginning of 21. Okay? They named him Isaac, which means laughter. I guess I have to get into this. It means laughter. He's circumcised on the 8th day. Abram's 100 years old when he has Isaac. Maybe this is familiar to us. God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will Isaac regarding me. So there's a lot of play on Isaac. Okay? Who would have said that Abram that Sarah would nurse children, yet I've borne him a son in his old age? Okay? Now that's our lead into another look at Hagar. Okay? So here we go. The child, this is verse 8, the child grew and was weaned. Abraham made a great feast on the day that Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, "Cast out this slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac." And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. But God said to Abram, "Be not displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring." So Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a skin of water and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Let me not look upon the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the boy, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy, and he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. Okay? Now, what strikes you about that? Anything that, similarities, differences from the chapter 16 that we just read? Just open the floor. Say more water, well of water. Yeah. Other things.
She was in distress.
In distress. Yeah. Cast out. In distress. Surrounded by, say it again.
She ran away.
Yeah, ran away. Yeah, ran away. Okay. The way that this starts is pretty revealing. Sarah sees what? That the son, okay, so that, kind of interesting. So we fast forward a few years. We fast forward, what, 13 years? We fast forward a few years. And Ishmael's older, and Isaac has just been weaned, so 2 or 3 years old, something like that. Okay. Sarah sees, oh boy, anytime operating with the eyes is always tough, but Sarah sees what? He's weaned, so even that language of being weaned is, like a weaned child with its mother, so my soul is. And okay, so she sees what? The son of Hagar. He doesn't get a name in this narrative. His name, we know his name, Ishmael, right? Now it's interesting. Why do we not get a name? And there's debate about this. I think we don't get a name because the jury is out. What kind of guy will this be? Ishmael.
Wild donkey.
A wild donkey of a man. Now, that's kind of a tough... Any of you named Donkey out there? Okay, all right. Nobody's named Donkey. But if someone tells you, and the Lord said it too, the Lord said you're going to be a wild... You're going to have a kid. You're going to have lots of kids. Actually, that's amazing. The promise of many kids first comes before she even hears about Ishmael. You'll be the mother of many, many, many. And by the way, you'll name this one Ishmael because God has heard you. Okay, so yeah, Hagar might have been kicked out of a house, but she gains a whole nation. That's kind of how suffering works with the Lord. You trust in Him through it, and you're not only restored, but it overflows. You've lost a place to live, guess what? You get a whole nation. Okay, that's Hagar. Now, in this narrative, he's not given a name. What kind of guy will he be? Wild donkey of a man. Well, what is he doing now? What is he doing here in this narrative? He's older, and he's Isaacing. Ishmael is, end of verse 9 there, Isaacing. What does that mean? It means that he's, okay, so what did you have we read from ESV, and that puts what? Laughing? He's laughing, okay? He's Isaacing. Now what does that mean? And you said laughter. Well, okay, now we got to go back to that. He's Isaacing. What does that mean? It means he's Isaacing. That's what it means. Okay, well, that's not helpful. Well, okay. He's Isaacing. What does that mean?
Well,
he's Ishmael. Why is he Isaacing?
well, because Sarah wanted him to be Isaac.
Okay.
And he's not the son of the promise.
When she references inheritance too, it's okay. Well, whatever Isaacing is probably has something to do with inheritance. Probably has something to do with, in some way you are trying to be Isaac. You're Isaacing. Do you think the inheritance is coming to you? Do you think the promise is coming through you? You are trying to be someone you're not. You're Ishmael. You're crossing a line there if you're trying to be Isaac. You're Isaacing. So in English we put laughing. But what you're doing is you're confusing roles. You're going after something that, no, it doesn't work that way. The Lord has given you what He's given you. That's how that works. But to see Ishmael Isaacing is a problem. That's a problem, okay? That's a confusion of, you could even say law and gospel. That's a confusion of how this works. The promise will come through Isaac, okay? It's not been given to you, Ishmael, to make yourself out to be Isaac. You can't go there. What you've been given, okay? And that's, I think, why his name is not used. The jury's out to see what kind of guy this will be. Yes, wild donkey of a man, but that doesn't mean he can't be saved. Doesn't mean he's, since the promise doesn't come through Ishmael, that means he's cast out. He has no chance of coming to faith. No, actually, Luther and many others. He said Hagar is not only a saintly woman, she's a matriarch. She receives this wonderful blessing of the Lord, and she teaches a whole church. And same with Ishmael. Ishmael, Luther's convinced, comes to the true faith. and teaches many others about true worship of God and so on. There's a lot to be said there, but at this point I'll just say this. The jury's out. No name. What kind of person will he be? When you go after somebody like this, confusing the roles, you are not Isaac. Okay? Notice God also says, listen to her voice this time. Okay? So in verse 10, when she says, drive out, cast out, that's the Garden of Eden talk. The Lord cast them out from the garden. Okay? Verse 10, cast out this slave woman. Treat this slave woman. Notice, I thought Ishmael's the problem. And what happens? Hagar this time she's along for the ride. What did she do? What did she do? Okay, in 16, we know the story there. We just went through it. Here I thought the problem was Ishmael. Hagar is cast out. Okay? Cast out the slave woman and her son. Notice, no names given. You could just say Hagar and Ishmael. No, the slave woman and her son. This is the language of Eden. Cast them out. And the amazing thing there is that, again, the Lord approves. The woman is mentioned first, and because you'll not be heir with my son Isaac. This thing was very displeasing to Abraham. Now that's a change, isn't it? Because in 16, what? Abram just listened to the voice of his, whatever is good in your eyes, do whatever you want. So both Sarah and Abram were acting like the true church gone bad. Okay? And now here it's what? Abram knows better. Abram knows better. This is evil, Sarah. This is evil. We shouldn't be doing this, right? And yet, God says, go ahead, let this happen. Now, why would he let this happen? And then you go through this narrative, you see, wait a minute. Why is God letting this happen? Verse 12. Don't be displeased. Literally, don't see it as evil. Don't see it as evil, because you're almost wondering, okay, this doesn't sound right. Abram knows better this time. Don't see it as evil. Why? Are you going to, he means it, she means it for evil, but you are going to mean it for good? Don't see it as evil. Okay? Don't let it be evil in your eyes. And whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And then what really strikes me after they're out is that everything that Hagar goes through. So Abram rises early. Oh my, already now, someone already mentioned this. I think it was it Kurt? Abram rising early in the morning. Sound familiar? And we're going to make a sacrifice. Oh my goodness. The sacrifice of Ishmael is before the sacrifice of Isaac. You have heard many times in church the sacrifice of Isaac, correct? The ram is caught by the horns in the thicket. We know this one. Before that ever happened was the sacrifice of Ishmael, carried out by Hagar. Okay? Another way that the Lord prioritizes the Gentile and says, the last will be first. Abram will be famous and the churches will hear about it for thousands of years. But Hagar beat him to the punch. Okay? So Abe gets up early in the morning. That's why the narrative also calls him a lad. That's how we'll hear of Isaac. So before the sacrifice of Isaac is the sacrifice of Ishmael. And what else do we have? He gets up early in the morning. Oh my goodness. And gives everything to Hagar, puts it on her shoulder along with the child, sends her away. She departs. She's in the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water is gone, she literally throws. she throws. She throws the child under a bush. Why is she throwing a child under a bush? That doesn't sound very good. Yeah, Abram has to send her away, just like he'll do sending when it comes to the sacrifice of Isaac. All this sounds like this is the sacrifice of Ishmael first. Why is Hagar throwing a kid under a bush? Because God's people will go through something very similar. When's that? Pharaoh will say, throw those kids into the Nile. Before the people of Israel do it, Hagar beats them to the punch. She throws her kid under a bush. She knows the thing of sacrifice. And before Abram sacrifices Isaac, we have the sacrifice of Ishmael. So throws him under a bush. She's sacrificing, you could put it this way, she's sacrificing a seed, an offspring for the sake of living in the seed. So she goes and sits down, and then guess who makes another appearance? God hears the voice of the boy. Now, I thought Hagar was crying. You see what happened there? I thought Hagar was the one that was weeping. God hears the voice of the boy. And then here's where the critic comes in and says, oh, we got more problems in the Bible. It's a contradiction. You can't believe it. Nope. Why? Because God will hear the voice of all of those boys, the Israelite boys. He will hear the voice of his people. He heard the voice of Hagar in 16. She's still crying in 21, but now he hears the voice of the boy. Now it's not only Hagar who sounds very Israelite, it's also the boy. How can you throw a 13-year-old under a bush? By the way, you see these things and you can't do that. That's exactly what she does. She sacrifices her beloved son. That's the life of faith. Will you give up your most prized possession? Spouse, child, fame, take they our life, goods, fame, child, all of those things. And then guess who shows up? The angel of the Lord from heaven. This is all sacrifice of Isaac talk. The angel of the Lord calling from heaven, what troubles you? Okay. All of this is sacrifice of Isaac talk. Only Hagar does it first to Ishmael. Fear not, lift up the boy, hold him fast with your hand. I'll make him into a great nation. And then what happens here? God opens her eyes to see the well of water. And it's the same language that's used of chapter 16. Only now, the well was there the whole time. It was what? God opening her eyes to see it. She was in distress. Okay? It's the same, it reads like it's the exact same well that she visited here. Okay? Only now it's, I've sacrificed this beloved son, and she's distressed. She doesn't know what to do. God keeps her eyes focused on the well. Keep your eyes focused. I don't know what God is up to in my life. Keep your eyes fixed on the water. Yeah, but it really feels like he's left me this time. Keep your eyes fixed on the water. Has he heard my cry? Keep your eyes fixed on the water. I'm so tired. I don't even know what to do, what to say. God lifts up her eyes to keep them focused on the water. Okay? And then by means of that, she gives some of that same water to the next generation. She goes and she fills it. This is all Israelite behavior in the promised land. You're going to have springs of water. You'll be married by them. You'll be able to draw water by them. And that's exactly what Hagar is doing. She sees the well of water. She goes and fills the skin. She gives it to the boy. And then guess what happens? And God was with her. And God was with him. Okay? This is exactly the kind of language that you would see for God blessing his people with abundance, being with them. As soon as the boy gets the water, God is with him. As soon as he gets the water, God is with him. Okay? That's the baptized life. You get the water, look at the water, return to the water. God is with you in this water as a baptized child of God. And that's what she does. She relies on the water. She sees the water. She gives the water to her son. So this is why I'm looking. Okay. This is why, as much as Hagar has been taken to be this kind of outsider, she's an Egyptian maidservant and so on. This is why this is why many kind of pre-modern interpreters, I'll put it that way, the older school, before the Enlightenment comes along, this is why we see Hagar as a saintly woman indeed, Luther writes, even if she symbolizes the ungodly. Now that's really, okay, I have to explain that. The problem is, not a problem, it's a good thing. In Galatians chapter 4, Paul says that you got Sarah, you got Hagar. Sarah represents the Jerusalem above, salvation by faith. Hagar is a bondwoman. She represents those who trust in their own works, basically, Galatians chapter 4. You can see two different covenants in them. So we know that's in the Bible, and we have to think about that. Okay, so there's something in Hagar that represents like that other covenant. All right? Yes. What would that be? Well, she's not going to give birth to Isaac. She's also fallen into the trap of what? Slighting others. Oh, now that I'm pregnant, does that mean that I'm in the club just by being pregnant and so on? So there's something in Hagar that represents that. But, Luther carries on, she must be counted among the saintly women, even if she frequently symbolizes the ungodly. That's okay? She's not perfect, but she's matriarchal in the best sense of the term, because she is, as the narratives unfold, ends up doing and being exactly what a true Israelite is all about. And I believe, this is Luther, and I believe that Ishmael too was saved, together with many of his descendants. Nor does it do him any harm that his mother symbolizes the synagogue. Thus, Hagar, justified and sanctified by the word of God, symbolizes the ungodly, yes, but without detriment to herself. What Hagar says of this well is a hymn of the whole church. And then Luther goes on about how she becomes a completely different person. The purpose of this being cast out, right, is for Ishmael to teach, but for Hagar to reinforce. That the kingdom of God does not work by reason of a natural right, but comes out of pure grace. Okay? And then he believes, and Luther goes on to say, the descendants of Ishmael also joined the church of Abraham. They became heirs of the promise, not by reason, not because of this natural right, but because of what he calls irregular grace. Even though the promise wouldn't be transmitted through them, it doesn't mean that they're prevented by hearing the word, coming to faith, and so on. So it's really fascinating how all this works out. It's the true church, and Sarah is turning from that role, starting to act like the unbelieving woman in chapter 16. Hagar is increasingly Israelite. She's increasingly believer. Angel of the Lord appears to her. Now we have Ishmael and all the hearing before seeing. Now we have Ishmael coming along, and that Hagar-like confession of the faith is being carried on by the successive generation. In Ishmael too, Luther says, him and many of his descendants behaved in similar ways, namely, returned to the affliction, trusted in God's mercy and grace, heard the word proclaimed by the house of Abraham, and were grafted in, and ended up being, at least on Luther's account, like models of the faith. So by means of this, God working through, think Sarah, persecution, by means of this, bringing it full circle, such that she's returned and ends up being a kind of model for the Christian faith. So that Sarah would see it and say, this is actually what's more Israelite, her behavior and not mine. Okay? And same for Ishmael. The Isaaking thing, right? No, I see it now. Isaaking, I'm not Isaac, I'm Ishmael. And yet that Isaac would see that and say, that's what the faith is all about, living by the water and believing in God's promises and so on. So really remarkable how Hagar comes in. If our theme is matriarchs here, in Sarah in 12 we saw this kind of sacrificial image. I would say that in 16 and in 21, you could say something like the church, the persecuted church. There's sacrifices also involved, but like the persecuted church, the church, people who are grafted into the church by means of being persecuted, and yet our Lord working through that persecution to direct eyes on his saving means of grace. Hagar, I think, does that beautifully in the book of Genesis and ends up being a kind of model for the matriarch Sarah as you move forward, or the matriarch Rebecca as you get to her. Hagar is, now I will, and I'll say more about that after lunch, that Hagar will be, that Rebecca will be introduced to us as if she is not only another Sarah, but Rebecca will be introduced to us as if she's like an idealized Hagar. It's really fascinating. Like, here's the outsider turning into a model for the insider. And Rebecca sees that, and that's exactly what it's all about. I'll say more about that after lunch, but I've been talking a lot. Are you guys still awake? Is everything going okay? Comments, questions, reactions? What do you think about all this Hagar business? I don't know how much we hear it in church. Hagar, yeah, go ahead.
When you say he was, they were Isaaking,
Yeah.
is there a direct connection back to when Sarah was laughing in the tent?
I thought, Phil, you were going to say, is there a direct connection to this?
Go ahead. Never mind what I said.
No, I will mind it. And that is, okay, yeah, you're right. Isaac means laughter. And so anytime you're reading along in Genesis and you hear Sarah laughed in the tent, Sarah Isaaced in the tent, can a child be born to a woman who is 100 years old, and so on. So anytime you hear the word laughter in Genesis, it's a form of the word Isaac.
So is that where it starts out, the laughter?
Yeah, laughter starts with the announcement of, you'll have this son. Yeah, you first get laughter in, isn't there one reference to laughter in 17, I think? And then 18 is Sarah in the tent. And then 19, that's Sodom and Gomorrah. 20, you have, 20 is Abimelech, which talks about, there's no laughter in 20. 21 is when he's actually born, Isaac. And 21 we just went through is when there's Isaaking from Ishmael, which means kind of usurping it. It's I want to be Isaac, and no, you're not that, and it doesn't come by way of your own desires or strength. That's not how this works. So you're going to have to be humbled in order to learn that. after that, here's where I thought you were going, Phil. Sorry. After that, in chapter 26, Abimelech sees Isaacing with Rebekah. And now what does that mean? Maybe we'll talk about that after lunch. But he sees Isaac, and then whatever, I don't know what it says in the English, but it says probably something like laughing. Laughing. Does it say laughing? I don't remember what it says there in the English. But yeah, so laughter starts there, you're right. And then it's used after this also. Yeah, what's laughing with Rebekah, his wife, doing Isaac-like things. Did I see another hand? Was there? Go ahead, yeah, Kurt.
So I guess I hope I'm not wandering to a field or far off a field. So we have Ishmael being born.
Yeah.
We know this, right? We have solid evidence that this is the Arab nation here. He's a descendant of the Arab nation.
Yeah.
Eventually Muslims.
Eventually, down the road, yeah.
I can't help but thinking when you say that he's granted all these blessings,
Yeah.
but yet he chooses not to believe in God. It becomes a pagan nation, essentially.
Yeah.
And now we have 1 billion Muslims that are not forsaking God. Mm-hmm. And you have to wonder, isn't it a shame that that didn't happen in the opposite direction? Mm-hmm. Why didn't he not latch on to God and become believers? Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, you're right. The Lord is working a promise, and it's transmitted through a particular, right? Abe, Isaac, not Ishmael, Jacob, not Esau, Judah, not Joseph, even though he gets a lot of playing time, right? So there's always like the unselected brother or whatever that branches off. It need not mean, now, Calvin, I brought him up earlier, and I didn't pick on him earlier, so it's high time I picked on him. Now, Calvin would say, well, therefore Ishmael's out of the church, and that's that. And God saves some, he doesn't save others, and that's just kind of how that works. Luther's very different on all of that. I think it's rather compelling. I think from the get-go, Genesis shows you the ingathering of the unselected all the time. Now, that doesn't mean it's always going to happen, because people will reject the gospel, and that happens even within the line. Okay, even God's own chosen people, and so many of them rejecting the gospel, right? And Paul would have to think about that in Romans, what that all means, because here's the Messiah, and their hearts are hardened, the veil is over their eyes. They're not turning to the Lord by confessing Christ, okay? Luther's take on that, I think, is the way to go, and that is, he's convinced Ishmael, like the historical Ishmael, Hagar, many of their descendants, this goes for Cain and many of his descendants. This goes for descendants of Esau. This goes for descendants of unselected people. Hear the word, confess the faith, and they are saved. Okay? Now, not all, and that's totally sad and unfortunate, right? But Luther's convinced these descendants are grafted in throughout the generations, even though they're not the selected one. Abe, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, right? Zerubbabel, all the way down on through the line. Okay? So Genesis does that too. It continually shows this kind of ingrafting of the unselected. Same thing could be said with Edom. Esau is Edom. That's a brother. That's a brother of Jacob. And so in time, some eras of God's people, Edom was fairly friendly. In Deuteronomy, there's good times, and Edom was chummy. And Edom, okay, it sounded like the gospel was having good range. Okay, other times, bad. Like Edom refusing passage. And Edom, by the time you get to the Babylonian captivity, you have entire books that just rail against Edom. Obadiah, an entire book of the Bible, is just blasting Edom for unfaithfulness. Okay? So yes, Ishmael will have descendants, and it may be that you're in an era of history where it looks like, boy, there's a lot of people that are rejecting the gospel. That's nothing new, I mean, as far as these descendants go. And meanwhile, the gospel is booming in another part of the world, and so on. Like, that's just kind of how, like a pelting rain, Dr. Helke's book, Luther's quote, that's just kind of how it goes. So yeah, you might say, well, aren't there a bunch of people that are, turning on the gospel? Oh, just read the Bible. That's just kind of, whether in-house, out-house, right?
Giving a summation of objective justification.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Objective justification. Yeah, our Lord died for all. We know that. Absolutely. And He wills that all would be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth, if that's what you mean by object. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.